The morning air in Neo-Arcadia carried the familiar scent of salt water and ozone that Lynn had grown accustomed to over her 13 years. From the observation deck of Orphanage Tower, she watched holographic advertisements shimmer between skyscrapers, their vibrant colors reflecting off the East Sea that surrounded the floating metropolis. 300 meters below, transport pods zipped along invisible tracks, carrying citizens to their daily routines, while service robots weaved between pedestrians on elevated walkways. Lynn tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, her fingers brushing against the small, neural interface embedded behind her earlobe, standard issue for all children at the Neo-Arcadia orphanage. It was the year 2175, and technology permeated every aspect of life, even for those society had relegated to its margins. "Thinking about jumping again?" came a soft voice behind her. Lynn didn't need to turn. She recognized Anne's voice, the way his words always seemed to hover on the edge of a whisper. At 11 years old, he was smaller than most boys his age, with watchful eyes that seemed to see beyond the visible spectrum. "I wasn't thinking about jumping," Lynn replied, though the thought had crossed her mind on darker days. "Just watching the city wake up." Anne joined her at the railing, his thin shoulders nearly touching hers. "You always watch the same spot, by the QRI building." The Quantum Research Institute tower stood apart from the other structures, its twisted helix design culminating in a glass dome where experimental technologies were birthed. Even from this distance, the building had an otherworldly glow, the result of quantum particles being manipulated within its walls. "My parents worked there," Lynn said, "before the accident." Anne nodded silently. They shared a common thread, like all residents of the orphanage: loss. Though for Anne, the loss was more abstract. He had been abandoned as an infant, left at the orphanage entrance without even a name. The caregivers had called him an peace in their language, hoping it might bestow upon him what his life had lacked. "Min is crying again," Anne said suddenly, his head tilting slightly as if listening to a distant frequency. Thao tried to help, but he pushed her away. Lynn sighed. 9-year-old Min was the newest arrival, still processing the loss of his family in a transport accident. Thao, though only 12, had appointed herself as the unofficial protector of younger children, a role born from surviving a devastating fire that had claimed her own family 2 years prior. "We should go back inside," Lynn said, giving the QRI building one last glance. "The field trip is today. If we're late, Uplink will report us." Uplink was the orphanage's AI assistant, a holographic presence programmed with basic psychological counseling protocols that served as both caretaker and surveillance. The children had learned to navigate its algorithms, finding the blind spots in its attention. They made their way through the observation deck's sliding doors, back into the sterile white corridors of Level 3, where the older children resided. The building hummed with the gentle vibration of environmental systems, the air precisely calibrated for optimal psychological well-being, or so the administration claimed. In the common room, they found Min huddled in a corner, his small frame shaking with quiet sobs. Thao stood a few meters away, her arms crossed, frustration evident in her stance. Her cropped hair and the faint scarring on her left forearm were visible reminders of what she had survived. "He won't stop," Thao said when she noticed Lynn and An. "I told him the field trip would be fun, but he says he's scared of the quantum gates." "Everyone's scared of them," Lynn replied, kneeling beside Min. "That's why we're excited to see them." Min looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "My dad said they're dangerous, that people disappear into them sometimes." A silence fell over the group. Transport accidents were common enough, but disappearances through quantum gates were the stuff of urban legends, stories told to frighten children or discredit the corporations that controlled them. Still, something in Min's words struck a chord with Lynn. "Your dad worked at QRI?" she asked gently. Min nodded. "He said they were pushing too fast, That the gates weren't stable. Before Lynn could ask more, the room's ambient lighting shifted to a cool blue, and Uplink's holographic form materialized in the center of the space, a gender-neutral figure composed of wireframe lines that pulsed with each word. "Good morning, young citizens," it said, its voice modulated to project calm authority. "The transport for your educational excursion to the Quantum Research Institute will arrive in 20 minutes. Please prepare accordingly." "We're already prepared," Thao said, her tone carrying a hint of defiance that the AI was programmed to ignore. "Excellent, Thao," Uplink replied. "Your enthusiasm for learning is noted." The hologram turned toward Min, its wireframe head tilting in a simulation of concern. "Min, your cortisol levels indicate distress. Would you like to discuss your concerns before departure?" Min shrank further into himself, shaking his head. Anne stepped forward. "He's fine," he said with unexpected firmness. "We'll help him." Uplink's form flickered momentarily, processing the intervention. "Very well. Peer support is encouraged. Remember that all observations during today's excursion will be evaluated as part of your societal integration assessment." With that reminder, a subtle threat that their behavior would affect their future placement in Neo-Arcadia's rigid social hierarchy, Uplink dissolved, leaving the children alone once more. "They're always watching," Thao muttered. "Not always," Anne replied. His eyes had taken on that distant look again, the one that made Lynn wonder what frequencies he could sense that others couldn't. "There are blind spots, places where the signals don't reach." Lynn helped Min to his feet. "Come on," she said. "I'll tell you about the quantum gates. They're not as scary as they sound." As they walked toward the transport bay, Lynn explained what she knew about QRI's work, partly from public broadcasts, partly from fragments of memory of her parents' conversations. The quantum gate network was meant to revolutionize travel, allowing instantaneous movement between points not just on Earth, but potentially between parallel universes. "Think about it," she said to Min, whose tears had finally subsided. "Whole other worlds where things happen differently. Maybe in one of them, your parents are still alive. Or maybe in one of them, you never existed at all," Thao added, earning a sharp look from Lynn. "That's not helping," Lynn said. Thao shrugged. "He should know the truth. That's what they're playing with at QRI, possibilities. And not all possibilities are good ones." The transport arrived precisely on schedule, a sleek, windowless pod that hovered silently at the loading platform. The children filed in along with 20 others from the orphanage, all between 9 and 14 years old. A human supervisor, rare in the largely automated facility, accompanied them. A woman named Ms. Lon, whose disinterested expression suggested this was merely another assignment in her rotation of duties. As the transport glided through Neo-Arcadia's transit tubes, Lynn found herself seated beside Anne, who was unusually quiet, even by his standards. "What's wrong?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Anne's fingers twitched slightly against the armrest. "Something feels different today. Like frequencies shifting." "What kind of frequencies?" He struggled to find the words. "The kind that aren't supposed to be there. Like when you hear a high-pitched sound that no one else notices." Lynn had long suspected that Anne's sensitivity went beyond normal perception. There were rumors among the children that he could predict power outages before they happened, that he sometimes spoke to people who weren't there. The administration had tested him repeatedly, but found nothing they could categorize or exploit. "Is it bad?" she asked. Anne hesitated. "Not bad. Just wrong. Like things are thin where they should be thick." Before Lynn could ask what he meant, the transport began to decelerate, and the automated announcement system informed them they were approaching the Quantum Research Institute. QRI's campus dominated the eastern edge of Neo-Arcadia, a complex of research facilities surrounding the central Helix Tower. As the children disembarked, they were greeted by a team of PR representatives, Young adults with identical smiles and matching corporate uniforms in QRI's signature indigo shade. "Welcome to the future of transportation," announced a woman at the front, her voice amplified to reach all corners of the arrival hall. "Today, you'll witness technology that will redefine humanity's relationship with space and time." The tour began with carefully scripted presentations about QRI's history and achievements. Holographic displays showed the evolution of quantum theory from the primitive understandings of the early 21st century to the practical applications of the 22nd. Children from wealthier educational facilities might have found this boring. But for orphans, whose education focused primarily on vocational skills, it was novel enough to hold their attention. All except Anne, who grew increasingly agitated as they approached the central facility. Lynn noticed him rubbing his temples, his eyes squinting as if against a bright light only he could see. "The frequencies," he whispered to her. "They're getting stronger." The tour group paused before massive reinforced doors bearing QRI's logo, an infinity symbol intersected by a vertical line. The PR representative gestured dramatically. "Behind these doors is QRI's crowning achievement, the Quantum Gate Network prototype. For safety reasons, we'll be observing from the secure viewing gallery. The actual gate is currently being calibrated for a test scheduled later today." As the doors parted, Lynn felt a strange sensation, like the moment before a lightning strike, when the air seems to hold its breath. Anne's hand suddenly gripped her wrist, his fingers ice cold. "We shouldn't be here," he said, his voice trembling. "The walls are too thin." Before Lynn could respond, they were ushered into the viewing gallery, a semicircular room with tiered seating facing a massive transparent barrier. Beyond the barrier was a laboratory unlike anything they had seen before. The chamber was dominated by a circular platform surrounded by 12 towering pylons that curved inward like the petals of an enormous metallic flower. Between the pylons, energy shimmered in patterns too complex for the eye to follow. Scientists in protective suits moved with purpose around the apparatus, making adjustments to control panels and conferring over holographic displays. At the center of this activity was a woman whose authority was evident even from a distance. Tall, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe style, directing operations with precise gestures. "That is Dr. Mora, our Director of Quantum Navigation," the guide explained. "She's pioneered much of the technology you see here today." Min pressed himself against Lynn's side. "That's her," he whispered. "The one my dad argued with." Before Lynn could ask for details, the guide continued her presentation. "The quantum gate creates a stable pathway through the quantum foam that underlies all reality. Think of it as a bridge between points that would normally be separated by vast distances, or even between different branches of possibility." "Different universes?" asked one of the older orphans. "Theoretical parallel dimensions," the guide corrected with a practiced smile. "Though we've yet to establish contact with any alternate realities, our current focus is instantaneous transport between Earth-based locations." As the explanation continued, Lynn noticed and staring not at the gate itself, but at what appeared to be an empty space near one of the laboratory walls. His expression was one of confused recognition. "Do you see her?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "See who?" "The girl. She's trying to tell us something." Lynn followed his gaze but saw nothing except scientists and equipment. "There's no girl, and she's there," he insisted. "She keeps appearing and disappearing. She's saying the gates are opening wrong, that they're tearing something." A chill ran through Lynn. Anne had never been prone to hallucinations, despite his sensitivities. If he was seeing something now. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden commotion in the laboratory. Alarms began to sound, and the scientists moved with increased urgency. The energy between the pylons intensified, shifting from a subtle shimmer to pulsating waves of blue-white light. "There seems to be some unscheduled activity," the guide said. her professional composure slipping slightly. Nothing to be concerned about. Technical adjustments are common during... She was cut off by a voice over the laboratory's communication system. Quantum pressure exceeding safety parameters. Optical containment failing in sectors 3 through 7. Dr. Mora's voice responded with calm authority. Initiate emergency protocols. Prepare for controlled shutdown. But the energy wasn't subsiding. Instead, it was coalescing into a swirling vortex at the center of the platform. The light grew so intense that many children shielded their eyes. Anne grabbed Lynn's arm with unexpected strength. "The walls are breaking," he said, his eyes wide with terror. "They're coming through." "Who's coming through?" Lynn demanded. But her question was lost in the chaos that followed. A blinding flash erupted from the center of the quantum gate, and Lynn felt, rather than heard, a deep, resonant boom that seemed to vibrate through her very atoms. The transparent barrier between the viewing gallery and the laboratory rippled like liquid. And then, impossibility dissolved. The last thing Lynn remembered was the sensation of being pulled by an irresistible force, her body stretching in ways that human anatomy was never meant to endure, and Anne's hands still clutching hers as they were torn from reality. Then darkness. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. First, the awareness of existence itself. Then, the realization that she had a body, though it felt wrong somehow, too light, as if she might float away if she moved too suddenly. Lynn opened her eyes to a world that shouldn't exist. The sky, if it could be called that, was a churning maelstrom of colors that had no names in human language. The ground beneath her was solid one moment and gelatinous the next, its texture shifting with each heartbeat. In the distance, land masses hovered and rotated slowly, defying gravity and logic in equal measure. "Anne?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, as if it were both inside and outside her head simultaneously. "Anne, are you here?" "I'm here." His voice came from behind her. "Min and Thao too. We all came through." Lynn turned to find her 3 companions huddled together on a relatively stable patch of ground. Anne looked pale but alert, his eyes darting around as if tracking invisible movements. Min was curled into a fetal position, while Thao stood protectively over him, her expression a mixture of fear and defiance. "Where are we?" Thao demanded. "What happened to everyone else?" Lynn struggled to organize her thoughts. "The quantum gate. There was a malfunction. We must have been pulled through." "Through to where?" Thao gestured at the impossible landscape. "This isn't anywhere." "It's everywhere," Anne said quietly. "All places at once. The spaces between spaces." Min whimpered, and Thao knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," she said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "We'll find a way back." "How?" Lynn asked, the full weight of their situation beginning to sink in. "We don't even know what this place is, let alone how to navigate it." Anne stood, his expression shifting to one of intense concentration. "There are paths," he said. "Quantum traces. I can feel them." "Quantum traces?" Thao looked skeptical. "Like threads connecting places that should be connected," and explained, "Some are stronger than others. The strongest ones might lead back to our world." Before they could discuss this further, the ground beneath them shuddered, and a portion of the landscape about 20 meters away began to distort. The distortion took form, vaguely humanoid, but composed of shifting darkness and fractured light. "Umbra," Anne whispered, his voice tinged with fear. "We need to move, now." "What is that thing?" Lynn asked, already backing away. "A quantum entity. It feeds on mental energy, thoughts, emotions, memories. If it catches us, it will drain us until there's nothing left." They didn't wait to see if Anne's warning was justified. With Thao helping Min to his feet, the 4 children fled across the unstable terrain, each step sending ripples through the fabric of this strange reality. As they ran, Lynn became aware of another presence, fleeting and inconsistent, but definitely there. A figure that appeared in glimpses at the corner of her vision, always vanishing when she tried to focus on it. A child, perhaps, with features that seemed to shift between appearances. "Anne," she gasped as they paused to catch their breath in the shadow of a floating crystalline structure. "I see her now. The girl you mentioned." Anne nodded, unsurprised. "She's been following us, trying to communicate." "What is she saying?" "Warnings. Something about black gates hunting us. And instructions. She wants us to find something called the Hexagate." Thao, who had been listening while keeping watch, interjected. "And why should we trust some ghost girl in a nightmare world?" "Because she's like us," Anne replied simply. "Lost between dimensions. But she's been here longer. She knows things." Ming, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "I want to go home," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I want my mom and dad." The raw anguish in his voice cut through their fear, reminding them of what was at stake. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a chance to return to a world that, despite its flaws, was home. "We will get home," Lynn promised, kneeling beside him. "All of us, together. But we need to be brave and follow the paths Anne can feel." "And watch for the ghost girl," Thao added, her skepticism giving way to pragmatic acceptance. "If she's offering help, we'd be stupid not to take it." Anne closed his eyes, his face a mask of concentration. After a moment, he pointed toward what appeared to be a corridor of relatively stable space between two churning vortices of matter. "That way. There's a strong quantum trace leading through there." As they ventured deeper into the chaos dimension, the environment became increasingly unpredictable. Gravity fluctuated without warning, at times crushing them against the ground, at others leaving them to float helplessly until they could grab onto something solid. Light behaved according to unknown laws, sometimes bending around objects, sometimes passing through them entirely. They soon encountered their first gray zone, a region where space and time blurred together, making movement disorienting and progress difficult to measure. Shapes appeared to stretch and compress, and sounds reached their ears before they were made. "I'll go first," Thao volunteered, her natural courage asserting itself. "Stay close and hold hands. No matter what happens, don't let go." The journey through the gray zone was a nightmare of sensory confusion. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours, only to snap back to instants. Lynn found herself experiencing moments multiple times, or seeing the same events from different perspectives simultaneously. By the time they emerged on the other side, all four were shaking with exhaustion, their minds struggling to process what they had experienced. "There will be more of those," Anne said grimly. "And worse. Over what might have been days, or merely hours, time being impossible to track reliably, they established a rhythm to their journey. Anne would sense the quantum traces and lead them along the strongest paths. Thao would take point when they encountered gray zones or other dangerous terrain, her determination serving as their shield. Lynn kept them focused on the goal of returning home, while gradually coaxing Min out of his shell of fear. The mysterious girl appeared with increasing frequency, though never for long enough to have a proper conversation. Through Anne's interpretations and their own glimpses, they pieced together fragments of information. The chaos dimension they traversed was a kind of liminal space between all possible realities. The quantum gate experiment had torn a hole in the fabric separating dimensions, pulling them through. And somewhere in this maze of fractured reality was an ancient structure called the Hexagate, a nexus point that might allow them to return to their own dimension. But they also learned of dangers. The Umbra entities were not the only threats. Quantum storms, swirling maelstroms of pure energy that could erase consciousness itself, roamed the landscape. And more ominously, something called the Dark Oracle was aware of their presence and sought to prevent their escape. "Why would this Dark Oracle care about us?" Thao asked, after they narrowly avoided a quantum storm, taking shelter in the hollow core of a floating mountain. "I don't know," Anne replied, though something in his voice suggested he wasn't being entirely truthful. They had all changed during their time in the chaos dimension. Min had grown less fearful, finding courage in the necessity of survival. Thao had tempered her defiance with compassion, recognizing that protecting others required more than just physical strength. Lin had developed a deeper understanding of her own resilience, as well as a fierce protectiveness toward her companions. But the most profound change was in An. His sensitivity to the quantum frequencies had intensified, allowing him to navigate with increasing precision. Yet, this ability seemed to come at a cost. Each time he guided them through a particularly difficult passage, he emerged more distant, his eyes reflecting lights that weren't there. "What do you see when you use your ability?" Lin asked him, during a rare moment of rest. Anne was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Everything. All possibilities at once. Every choice that could have been made. Every path not taken." He shuddered slightly. "It's beautiful. And terrible." "Does it hurt?" "Not exactly. But it changes something inside me. Like I'm becoming less human." Lin took his hand, alarmed to find it cool to the touch. "You're still you. And hold on to that." He squeezed her hand in return, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Their journey took a significant turn when they discovered the ancient ruins. Emerging from a particularly treacherous gray zone, they found themselves on the shore of what Anne called the Infinite Pool, a vast expanse of liquid that reflected not their own images, but countless variations of reality, rippling and shifting with every disturbance. Beyond the pool stood a structure that could only have been created by intelligence. Massive stone-like pillars, arranged in a hexagonal pattern, inscribed with symbols that seemed to move when viewed directly. At the center of the hexagon was a raised platform, its surface carved with intricate patterns that glowed with a soft, pulsing light. "The Hexagate," and breathed, a mixture of awe and fear in his voice. "It's real," Thao said, equally amazed. "Your ghost girl was telling the truth." As they approached the ancient structure, the mysterious girl manifested more clearly than ever before. A child of indeterminate age, her form shifting between states of solidity and transparency. "You found it," she said, her voice echoing as if coming from multiple sources simultaneously. "But it's dormant without the hexacore." "The what?" Lin asked. "The quantum crystal that powers the gate. It was removed long ago for safekeeping." "Where is it now?" Thao demanded. The girl's form flickered anxiously. "The Dark Oracle has it, in the Citadel of Echoes." "And where is that?" Lin pressed. The girl pointed across the infinite pool, where a distant structure hung suspended in the chaos, a twisted tower of what appeared to be solidified darkness, occasionally illuminated by flashes of internal lightning. "That's where we need to go?" Min asked, his voice small, but no longer trembling with fear. The girl nodded. "But be careful. The Dark Oracle knows you're here. It knows what you seek." "Why is it trying to stop us?" Thao asked. "What does it care if we go home?" The girl's form began to fade. "Because your return could change everything. The balance of all dimensions hangs on what happens next." With those cryptic words, she vanished entirely. They made camp, insofar as such a concept had meaning in this place, near the Hexagate, discussing their next move. The Citadel of Echoes loomed in the distance, its very appearance suggesting danger. "We need to rest before we attempt to cross," Lin decided. "And we need a plan." As the others settled into uneasy sleep, Lin took first watch, gazing out over the infinite pool. Its surface had calmed somewhat, and in its depths, she could make out scenes from what might have been her own life. Had things been different? Herself, with parents still alive. Herself never born at all. Infinite variations on a theme. It's mesmerizing, isn't it? Anne said, joining her at the water's edge. All those possibilities. Do you think there's one where we never came here? Where we're still in Neo-Arcadia, just ordinary orphans? Anne was quiet for a moment. Probably, but we're here now. This is our reality. For now, Lynn said firmly. We're going home, and all of us. He didn't respond to that. Instead, changing the subject. I've been thinking about the Dark Oracle, about why it would want to stop us. What have you figured out? I think... He hesitated. I think it's afraid of what happens if we use the Hexagate. Maybe opening it does something more than just send us home. Maybe it changes something fundamental about the multiverse itself. Lynn considered this. That would explain why it's trying to stop us. But we can't stay here forever. And we have to take the risk. I know, he said, his voice heavy with an emotion Lynn couldn't quite identify. I just hope we're making the right choice. The crossing of the infinite pool the next day, if terms like day had any meaning, proved more challenging than anticipated. The liquid surface, while appearing calm, reacted to their presence with increasing volatility the further they ventured. Reflections rose up like tentacles, trying to ensnare them with visions of alternate lives. Min nearly succumbed to a reflection showing his parents still alive, reaching toward the illusory image until Thao pulled him back. It's not real, she insisted, though her own eyes lingered on a reflection showing her untouched by fire, surrounded by family. The approach to the Citadel of Echoes was even more treacherous. The structure seemed to resist their presence, the very fabric of space twisting to create obstacles. Gravity reversed without warning, sending them tumbling upward only to crash down again. Temporal anomalies caused them to experience the same moments repeatedly, creating a disorienting loop that took all of Anne's concentration to navigate. By the time they reached the entrance, a towering archway of what appeared to be solidified shadow, all four were exhausted, their resolve tested to its limits. We can't turn back now, Lynn said, seeing the doubt in her companion's eyes. We've come too far. Inside, the Citadel defied conventional architecture. Corridors branched and rejoined without logic. Staircases led to ceilings that became floors, and doorways opened onto vistas that couldn't possibly fit within the structure's exterior dimensions. Throughout, they caught glimpses of the mysterious girl, fleeting appearances that seemed to guide their path through the labyrinth. At the heart of the Citadel, they found what they sought, in a chamber of impossible geometry, suspended in a column of pulsating energy, was the hexacore, a crystalline object of perfect hexagonal symmetry, glowing with an inner light that shifted through colors beyond the visible spectrum. And guarding it was the Dark Oracle. The entity was humanoid in basic shape, but composed of what appeared to be living shadow and fractal light. Its face, if it could be called that, was a void marked by points of intense brightness, where eyes might be. When it spoke, its voice resonated on multiple frequencies simultaneously, creating a dissonant chorus. The lost children, it said, the words seemingly bypassing their ears to manifest directly in their minds. You've come for what you cannot have. We just want to go home, Lynn said, stepping forward despite her fear. We need the hexacore to activate the gate. Home, the Dark Oracle repeated, and something like bitterness crept into its multi-layered voice. You have no concept of what awaits you should you return. No understanding of the price that must be paid. Anne moved to stand beside Lynn, his expression troubled. What price? The Dark Oracle's form rippled, expanding to fill more of the chamber. The hexagate is not merely a doorway. It is a fulcrum upon which balance all dimensions. To use it carelessly is to risk the collapse of countless realities. We're just trying to get back to our own dimension, Thao argued. How does that threaten anything? Because you do not belong here, the entity replied. Your presence is an anomaly, a tear in the fabric of possibility. To return you to your origin point would require the realignment of quantum threads across multiple dimensions. The risk of catastrophic collapse is significant. So you're saying we're stuck here forever? Min asked, his voice breaking. That we can never go home? That is the safer path, the Dark Oracle confirmed. For the greater good of all realities. Lin felt anger rising within her. Anger at the unfairness of their situation. At being told to sacrifice their future for some abstract greater good. No, she said firmly. We're going home. There has to be a way to use the gate safely. The Dark Oracle's form contracted suddenly, becoming more defined and somehow more familiar. There is no safe way, it insisted, and as it spoke, Lin noticed something that sent a chill through her, patterns in its speech, in its movements, that reminded her unmistakably of Anne. A terrible suspicion began to form in her mind. Who are you? She demanded. Really? The Dark Oracle's form shifted again, and for a brief moment, its features resolved into a face, older, marked by suffering, but unmistakably Anne's face. I am what remains, it said, after everything was lost. Anne staggered backward as if physically struck. You're me? A possibility of you, the Dark Oracle confirmed. One who returned through the Hexagate, only to discover the cost was too high. One who watched as the multiverse began to unravel because of our hubris. What cost? Lin asked, though part of her feared the answer. To pass through the Hexagate is to sever your connection to your original timeline. Your memories, your identity, all must be sacrificed to maintain dimensional stability. Our memories? Thao echoed, horrified. Everything that makes you who you are. The Dark Oracle, the future Anne, confirmed. You would return to Neo-Arcadia as empty vessels, with no recollection of your past, your families, your hopes or dreams. Min began to cry softly. The prospect of losing what little he had left of his parents, too much to bear. Thao put an arm around him, her own expression stricken. There has to be another way, Lin insisted. There is none, the Dark Oracle replied. I have explored every possibility, traversed every branch of quantum reality, seeking an alternative. That is why I removed the hexacore, to prevent you from making the same mistake I did. But you remember, and pointed out to his future self, you still know who you are. Because I chose differently in the end, the Dark Oracle said. I remained here, in the chaos dimension, where memory can persist untethered from dimensional constraints. A half-existence, but one that allowed me to preserve what I am. A heavy silence fell over the chamber as the implications sank in. To return home meant to lose everything that defined them. To stay meant eternal exile in this impossible realm. But Lin noticed something in the Dark Oracle's explanation. A hint of uncertainty. Perhaps even deception. You're not telling us everything, she said. There's something more. The entity's form rippled with what might have been agitation. What matters is the choice before you. Return and forget, or remain and remember. Anne stepped closer to his future self, studying the shifting form with newfound understanding. You're afraid, he said suddenly. Not of what happens if we go back, but of what happens if we find a way to go back and remember. The Dark Oracle's form expanded threateningly, tendrils of darkness lashing out to surround them. Enough! You cannot comprehend the forces at play. But Anne stood his ground. You removed the hexacore not to protect the multiverse, but to protect your own existence. If we find a way to return with our memories intact, you, this version of me, might never come to be. The chamber began to shake as the Dark Oracle's form destabilized, the air filling with crackling energy. I have existed for centuries in your subjective time, preserving the balance. I will not be undone by children who cannot grasp the consequences of their actions. In the chaos that followed, the Dark Oracle launched its attack. Tendrils of quantum energy lashed out, targeting not their bodies, but their minds. Min collapsed first, trapped in a web of memory mirages that showed him his worst fears. Thao fell next, her consciousness pulled into fragmented reflections of her past. Lin and Anne stood back to back, fighting against the mental assault. "We need to get to the hexacore," Lin gasped, struggling to maintain her focus as illusory images of her parents' deaths played before her eyes. "I'll distract him, me, whatever," Anne said. "You make for the core." Before Lin could protest, Anne launched himself toward the Dark Oracle, his smaller form seemingly no match for the entity's power. Yet, as they collided, something unexpected happened, a resonance, like two identical frequencies converging. The Dark Oracle's form destabilized further, parts of it synchronizing within in a cascade of quantum entanglement. Lin seized the opportunity, diving toward the column of energy that contained the hexacore. As her fingers closed around the crystalline object, she felt a surge of power, unlike anything she had experienced, as if she were touching the very foundation of reality itself. "Anne," she called, "I have it!" But Anne was locked in a struggle beyond physical comprehension. As he grappled with his future self, Lin saw something transforming in him, his eyes glowing with the same fractured light as the Dark Oracle, his form becoming less distinct at the edges. "You can't fight me," the Dark Oracle thundered. "I am what you become." "No," Anne replied, his voice somehow cutting through the chaos. "You're what I might become, but I choose differently." With those words, Anne did something that Lin couldn't fully comprehend, reaching within himself to the quantum frequency that resonated with his future self, and deliberately disrupting it. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Both Anne and the Dark Oracle screamed in unison, their forms briefly merging before violently separating. The Dark Oracle's form began to disintegrate, pieces of its existence scattering like dust in a storm. "What have you done?" it wailed. "Change the future," Anne replied, though he too seemed diminished, as if parts of his potential had been erased along with his future self. In the aftermath, they revived Min and Thao, who emerged disoriented but unharmed from their memory traps. The hexacore pulsed in Lin's hands, its light now steady and focused. "We need to get back to the gate," she said, "before anything else tries to stop us." The journey back across the infinite pool was eerily uneventful, as if the chaos dimension itself had been stunned by the confrontation between Anne and his future self. When they reached the hexagate, the mysterious girl was waiting for them, her form more stable than before. "You succeeded," she said, sounding surprised, "and changed fate in the process." "What happens now?" Lin asked, holding up the hexacore. "How do we use this?" The girl guided them through the process of activating the ancient mechanism. The hexacore had to be placed at the center of the platform, within the intricate pattern carved into its surface. As they positioned it, the crystal began to resonate with the larger structure, light flowing from it into the hexagonal pillars surrounding them. "When the gate opens, you must all pass through together," the girl instructed. "Focus on your destination, your Neo-Arcadia, your timeline." "But what about our memories?" Thao asked. "The Dark Oracle said we'd forget everything." The girl's expression grew solemn. "That is the price. The quantum alignment cannot sustain your original neural patterns across the dimensional boundary. Your core identities will remain, but your personal histories will be lost." Min began to cry again, softly. "I don't want to forget my parents. They're already gone. If I forget them, it's like they never existed at all." Lin knelt beside him. "They existed, Min, and they loved you. That truth doesn't change even if we can't remember it." "There has to be another way," Thao insisted. Anne, who had been unusually quiet since their confrontation with the Dark Oracle, finally spoke. There might be, he said slowly, not to keep all our memories, but perhaps to preserve a connection. All eyes turned to him. When I disrupted my future self, I felt something, a quantum node within myself, a point of resonance that defines who I am across all possible timelines. He looked at Lin, his expression intense. I think we all have them, and maybe, if we link them somehow before we cross, we could maintain some connection to each other. Lin finished, understanding dawning. Even if we forget the details. It's theoretical, Anne admitted, but worth trying. As the Hexagate's activation reached its peak, the 6 pillars now blazing with energy that formed a dome over the central platform, the 4 children joined hands in a circle around the hexacore. Focus on each other, and instructed, not on memories or experiences, but on the feeling of connection, on what makes us, us. The gate reached full power, the dome of energy contracting to form an aperture directly above them. Through it, they could see distorted glimpses of what might have been Neo-Arcadia, familiar architecture twisted by the lens of quantum translation. Now, Anne shouted over the rising hum of energy. The hexacore shattered as the gate fully engaged, fragments dissolving into pure light that enveloped them. Lin felt a sensation of being unmade, molecules separating, consciousness dispersing. Her last coherent thought was of Anne's hand in hers, and a desperate hope that something of their connection would survive what came next. Then everything went white. The return of the 4 missing children to Neo-Arcadia was hailed as a scientific miracle. 3 weeks after their disappearance during the catastrophic quantum gate malfunction, they materialized in the exact center of QRI's main research facility, unconscious but physically unharmed. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. Quantum orphans return from between dimensions, screamed the headlines. Experts were consulted, theories proposed and debated. Politicians made speeches about the resilience of the human spirit and the triumph of Neo-Arcadian technology. But amidst the celebration and scientific excitement, a more troubling reality emerged. The children remembered nothing, not their names, not their histories, not even basic facts about their world. Brain scans showed normal activity, but massive neural reorganization, as if their minds had been completely rewired. Dr. Mora, whose career had nearly ended with the initial accident, now found herself rehabilitated as the scientist who had predicted the children's return. In private, however, she was haunted by the empty eyes of the children she had inadvertently sent into the unknown. They're essentially new people, she explained to the orphanage administrators. Their procedural memories remain intact. They can walk, talk, perform basic functions, but their episodic memories, their personal histories, those are gone completely. Will they recover? Asked the facility director. Dr. Mora hesitated. I don't know. This is unprecedented. We'll need to monitor them closely, reintroduce them to their own identities gradually. At the orphanage, the 4 children were kept together in a special observation unit. They were told their names, shown pictures of their past selves, given basic information about their lives before the accident. They accepted this information with polite interest, as if learning about strangers who happened to share their faces. Lin, who had to be reminded repeatedly that this was her name, spent hours staring out the window at the QRI building in the distance, though she couldn't explain why. Thao, now without the fierce protectiveness that had defined her, smiled pleasantly at everyone, but formed no real connections. Min, no longer afraid but also without joy, methodically constructed complex structures with building blocks, then disassembled them without emotion. And Anne, whose sensitivity to quantum frequencies had vanished entirely, sat quietly for hours, his eyes fixed on nothing, occasionally reaching out to touch a space beside him where no one stood. Uplink, the orphanage's AI assistant, was reprogrammed with enhanced psychological protocols to help with their rehabilitation. It worked with them daily, recording every sign of progress or regression, analyzing their adaptation to their new reality. They function well enough, it reported to the administration, but there are anomalies in their behavior patterns. What kind of anomalies? Dr. Mora asked during one of her weekly visits. They gravitate toward each other despite having no memory of their shared experience. When separated, their stress levels rise significantly, and they sometimes speak to each other in what appears to be a private language, words and phrases that have no meaning in any known dialect. Dr. Mora's interest was piqued. Can you give examples? They refer to something called gray zones when discussing difficult situations. They use the term umbra to describe feelings of dread, and they sometimes speak of an infinite pool when looking at reflective surfaces. Fragments, Dr. Mora murmured. Fragments of memory persisting somehow. 1 month after their return, Lynn awoke in the middle of the night to find Anne sitting by the window of their shared recovery room, staring up at the stars, visible between Neo-Arcadia's towering structures. You should be sleeping, she said, using the words she had been taught were appropriate for such situations. Anne turned to her, and for a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his eyes that seemed more familiar than it should have been. I keep seeing her, he said quietly. Who? The girl, the one who guided us. Lynn felt a strange resonance at his words, though she had no context for them. What girl? I don't know her name, but she keeps trying to tell me something. He looked back to the stars. Something about walls being thin again. Lynn joined him at the window, and as she did, her hand brushed against his. A jolt passed between them, not electrical, but something deeper, as if two parts of a severed whole had momentarily reconnected. Images flashed through her mind, impossible landscapes, a pool that reflected infinite possibilities, a crystal shattering into light, and faces, Min's, Thau's, Anne's, bound together by an experience she couldn't quite grasp. Anne gasped, clearly experiencing something similar. Their eyes met, and for the first time since their return, Lynn felt a genuine connection, not to the identity she had been told was hers, but to something more fundamental. We were somewhere else, she whispered. Together. Between, Anne replied, the word coming from nowhere and everywhere. We were between. In the days that followed, more moments like this occurred, brief flashes of connection not just between Lynn and Anne, but among all 4 children. They began to seek these moments out, finding that physical contact often triggered them. A clasped hand, a shoulder touch, and suddenly, a fragment would emerge from the void of their lost memories. Dr. Mora observed these developments with professional interest that gradually transformed into something more personal. They're reconstructing their experience, she told her research team. Not through conventional memory, but through quantum entanglement at the neural level. Is that even possible? Asked her assistant. A month ago, I would have said no. But these children have experienced something beyond our current understanding of physics. Their brains may have been permanently altered. The orphanage administration was less interested in the theoretical implications than in the practical ones. Are they recovering or not? The facility director demanded. Not in the conventional sense, Dr. Mora admitted. They won't remember their lives before the accident. Those neural pathways are gone, but they're forming new connections, building a shared understanding of their experience in the chaos dimension. And is that a good thing? Dr. Mora considered the question carefully. I don't know, but I think it's necessary for them, at least. 6 months after their return, the media interest had largely faded. The quantum orphans were old news, replaced by newer sensations. But within QRI, research continued based on the scant data collected during both the accident and the children's miraculous return. Lynn, now more comfortable with her name if not her identity, stood before a device called a quantum trace detector, a research tool developed from the findings of the incident. It was designed to measure subtle quantum fluctuations that might indicate connections between dimensions. "Just stand still," the technician instructed. "The scanner will do the rest." As the device hummed to life, Anne stood nearby, watching with an intensity that had become characteristic of him in recent months. Thao and Min waited in an adjacent room, their presence a condition Lin had insisted upon. The scanner projected a field of blue light that surrounded Lin, analyzing quantum patterns associated with her atomic structure. On the monitoring screen, data flowed in streams too complex for most humans to interpret. But Dr. Mora, overseeing the procedure, suddenly straightened in surprise. "That can't be right," she murmured, adjusting the settings. "Run it again." The second scan produced the same results. Lin's quantum signature showed anomalies that defied conventional physics, patterns that suggested parts of her existed simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. "What does it mean?" Lin asked, noting the scientist's confusion. Dr. Mora chose her words carefully. "It means you brought something back with you, a connection to the place you were." "The chaos dimension," Lin said, the term emerging from some place beyond memory. "Yes," Dr. Mora confirmed, "and possibly to other dimensions as well." When the other 3 children were scanned, similar anomalies appeared, though with variations unique to each of them. Anne's readings were the most pronounced, showing quantum entanglement patterns of extraordinary complexity. "It's as if parts of you are still there," Dr. Mora explained to the 4 of them afterward. "And parts of that place are still in you." "Can you use this to help us remember?" Thao asked. "Not directly, but it might help us understand what happened to you, and why only fragments of your experience remain accessible." That night, the 4 children met in secret, gathering in the observation deck where Lin and Anne had once watched the sunrise over Neo-Arcadia. Though none of them remembered that earlier time, the space felt right somehow, a connection to their past selves that transcended conscious memory. "Dr. Mora thinks we're still connected to the chaos dimension," Lin said. Her voice hushed despite the absence of monitoring at this hour, another inexplicable knowledge they all shared. "And to each other," and added, "That's why we can sometimes remember together." Ming, who had grown more articulate in recent months, looked thoughtful. "I had a dream last night, about a pool that showed different versions of myself." "The infinite pool," Thao said, the name coming to her without effort. "I've dreamed of it too." "What if we could strengthen these connections?" Lin suggested. "Find more fragments, put them together?" Anne nodded slowly. "I think that's what we've been doing already, just not systematically." He held out his hand to the center of their circle. "When we touch, the fragments come more easily." One by one, they placed their hands together in the center of their circle. The contact sent a ripple of sensation through them. Not quite memory, but something adjacent to it. Impressions, feelings, snippets of experience that belonged to all of them and none of them. "The hexagate," Lin whispered, the image clear in her mind for the first time. "We used it to come back. But we had to leave something behind," Thao continued, the knowledge flowing between them. "Our memories, our past." "To maintain the balance," Min added, "so the multiverse wouldn't collapse." Anne's expression was intense, focused. "But what if there's a way to recover what we lost? Not by remembering, but by reconnecting." The idea took hold among them, a shared purpose emerging from the fragments of their experience. They began to meet regularly, in secret, combining their fragments into a more coherent whole, using the quantum connections between them to bridge the gaps in their individual recollections. Dr. Mora, noting their progress in formal sessions, encouraged these interactions while remaining unaware of their true extent. "They're healing each other," she reported to her superiors, creating a new, shared identity based on their unique experience. What she didn't report, what she kept as a private observation, was the other phenomena that accompanied their growing connection. The way small objects sometimes moved in their presence without being touched. The way electrical systems occasionally fluctuated when they were deep in conversation. The way Anne, in particular, sometimes spoke answers to questions before they were asked. 1 year after their return, the 4 children, no longer subjects of intense study, were reintegrated into the general orphanage population. They attended classes, participated in activities, and by most external measures, had adapted to their new reality. But in private, their work continued. Using the fragments they had recovered and the quantum connections between them, they began to construct a new understanding of not just where they had been, but what it meant for their future. The multiverse is real, Anne explained as they gathered in their secret meeting place, a maintenance alcove near the environmental systems where monitoring was minimal. Not just theoretical, and the walls between dimensions are thinner than most people realize. The quantum gate accident proved that, Lynn agreed. But why were we the only ones affected? I don't think we were, Anne said thoughtfully. I think we were just the only ones who came back. The implications of this statement hung in the air between them. How many others might be trapped in the chaos dimension? How many might have been lost during other experiments? Other tears in the fabric of reality. The girl, Min said suddenly, the one who helped us. She was lost too. And still is, Thao added, the knowledge emerging from their collective fragments. She chose to stay, to guide others. Like the Dark Oracle did, Anne said quietly, only with different intentions. This mention of the Dark Oracle sent a chill through their connection. Though they had reconstructed much of their experience, the confrontation between Anne and his future self remained largely obscured. Too traumatic, perhaps, or too paradoxical for their reassembled consciousness to fully integrate. What if we could help her? Lynn suggested. Find a way to bring her back too. The question sparked a new direction in their shared purpose. If they had managed to return, might others be able to as well? And if the walls between dimensions were indeed thinning, what responsibility did they bear with their unique perspective and experience? Over the following months, they studied in earnest quantum physics, dimensional theory, the research papers emerging from QRI's continued exploration of the gate technology. They absorbed this knowledge with an intuitive understanding that went beyond their apparent ages, integrating it with their fragmented memories of the chaos dimension. Dr. Mora, now heading her own research division focused on dimensional boundary theory, noticed their interest and quietly provided access to resources beyond what would normally be available to orphanage residents. She never explicitly acknowledged what she was doing, but her support was clear. They understand intuitively what my team struggles to theorize, she confided to her private research log. Whether they realize it or not, they're helping to advance our understanding of the multiverse by decades. 2 years after their return, now aged 15, 13, 14, and 11 respectively, Lynn and Thao and Min stood once more before the quantum trace detector, this time not as subjects, but as collaborators in Dr. Mora's research. The theory is sound, Lynn explained, highlighting sections of the equation displayed on the laboratory's main screen. If we can identify the unique quantum signature of the chaos dimension, we should be able to establish a stable communication channel. Without the risks of physical transit, and added, no need to open a full gate. Dr. Mora studied their work with barely concealed amazement. This goes beyond anything we've considered. You're suggesting not just detection of other dimensions, but actual communication between them. We think it's possible, Thao said with the quiet confidence that had replaced her former defiance. We've already experienced it in fragments, dreams, impressions, moments of connection. And if we can communicate, Min concluded, we might be able to help others find their way back. As the quantum trace detector powered up, calibrated to specifications derived from their collective understanding, the four children joined hands once more. The gesture was partly symbolic, partly practical, their quantum entanglement strengthened through physical contact, enhancing the signal they hoped to generate. The laboratory lights dimmed as power redirected to the detector. On the monitoring screens, quantum fluctuations appeared as intricate patterns, shifting and realigning as the device sought the specific frequency they had calculated. "There," Anne said suddenly, pointing to a pattern that had stabilized momentarily. "That's it. That's the resonance." Dr. Mora adjusted the detector's focus, enhancing the pattern. "Remarkable. It's maintaining coherence far longer than should be possible." As they watched, the pattern began to evolve, transforming from random fluctuations into something more structured, almost like a language written in quantum states. And within that pattern, a presence began to emerge, familiar to the four children through their reconstructed memories. The mysterious girl who had guided them through the chaos dimension. No words were exchanged. The communication occurred at a level more fundamental than language, a quantum resonance between consciousnesses that had once shared the same impossible space. But the message was clear nonetheless. The walls are thinning again. What was torn is not fully healed. What was lost may yet be found. As the connection faded, the four children looked at each other with a mixture of awe and determination. They had lost their past when they returned from between dimensions. But in that loss, they had found a new purpose, a responsibility born from their unique experience. "We need to go back, don't we?" Thao asked, though she already knew the answer. "Not to stay," Lin clarified, "but to help those still lost, to understand what's happening to the boundaries between worlds. To finish what we started," Anne said quietly. Ming, the youngest but in some ways the wisest, added the final piece. "And to remember, truly remember who we are." Dr. Mora, witnessing their exchange with only partial understanding, saw in their expressions the same determination that had once driven her own research, before bureaucracy and profit motives had compromised her vision. "Whatever you're planning," she said carefully, "whatever you've discovered, I want to help." And so a new chapter began. Not a return to what was lost, but a movement toward something new. The quantum orphans, children lost between dimensions and returned transformed, had found in their fragmented experience a connection to something larger than themselves, a multiverse of possibilities, and a responsibility to those still caught between them. In the heart of Neo-Arcadia, as night fell and the city's lights competed with the stars, four children who had once been ordinary orphans looked up at the sky with eyes that had seen beyond ordinary reality. The memories of their journey remained incomplete, the connections between them still forming and reforming as they pieced together the fragments of their experience. But one thing was certain: their story was not ending, but evolving, expanding outward like the multiverse itself, into possibilities they were only beginning to understand.